Unfortunately, there's some people who are still doing it the same way as it was done 30 years ago. It kind of started with people looking at logical model, creating a physical model, creating some DDL and making a physical database. And the world has moved on. It's now a real valuable business tool, and that's a lot of the stuff that Claritech and IPL are doing together. So, Alec?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing I've noticed is that 30 years ago when I started consulting, I would be hired to do a data model which would, eventually support a system that was under construction. Now, like Chris, I get brought in to solve some business problem or help the client solve their own problem, and I'm always doing data modeling, doing more than ever. The interesting thing is not under the title data modeling. Usually we just do it, JDI.
Yes.
And pretty soon the client sees we're describing their business in a way they haven't seen before. They're getting insights from that. We may sneak in the term data modeling much later, but now it's a fundamental technique in, I would say, almost all our consulting assignments.
I think that's right, and that's a very good point that Alec makes there about don't use the term data modeling. There's quite a few organizations that got historical baggage associated with that. So we try and often call it, business scenarios or understanding information flows, and we might, secretly be doing data modeling behind the scenes.
I often call it a worldview. Here's how you see the world. And as an example of a very interesting assignment, we then said, here's the worldview of this package that you are unhappy with. We didn't tell them it was process or data or services or what. Just here's how you see the world, here's how the package sees the world. Do you notice some differences?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And it doesn't have to actually end in computer systems. For a lot of the time, when I was in one of the big management consultancies for many years, and we were regularly asked to help when there were mergers and acquisitions, and we secretly produced a data model, and it was a very, very high level data model, and this was to communicate with executives from both parts, from both organizations, to help them come up with a common vocabulary, a kind of lingua franca, if you like.
Yeah. Can I give you another example? I had a very interesting situation several years ago where I took a call, back when we used telephones, I took a call from a client who said essentially, Alec, can you fly out and I'm quoting here, do that thing you do. Now, as a consultant, that's magic. Yes. What thing would that be? And he said, well, it was that entity data stuff. And I said, okay, data modeling, right, I can come out and help out with that. It turned out it was part of a major package implementation, and all these people had participated in a session I had run the year before, and they thought, we understood our business a lot better after we did that thing, and so we should probably do it before we implement this multi-million-dollar package. And it was a very successful implementation in the end.
And one of the great things as well, is you asked the question at the beginning, Tony, has stuff moved on in the last 30 years? When I started with this in '79, I think it was. Obviously, I was 2 at the time, so I've been doing it a while. A lot of systems were developed from scratch. You do the modeling, you create the physical DBMS, but of course now we have, a whole host of other application, examples. Very importantly is packages. The big ERP packages. And if I had £1 for every time somebody said we don't need to do data models because we're putting, XYZ package in, then I'd have, well, lots of pounds. And that's a real key thing, because it's about understanding the information in your business environment. It's not always about building a brand new system.
Yep, absolutely. I've done this so many times, it's I have to make sure I don't get the examples mixed up. But essentially, the client realized that they were very uncomfortable with the system. The federal regulator was even more uncomfortable with it, and they just didn't know why. They thought the requirements were wrong. They thought the system logic was wrong. They just didn't know where the problem really was. And by listening to their problems, the complaints they had about the application, I was actually from that able to infer what their worldview was. And that's what I called it. I didn't call it a data model, it was a worldview.
Yes.
And then with some persuasion, we got the vendor to provide their worldview, otherwise known as a stack of DDL, this thick, from which we abstracted the application's worldview.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most satisfying consulting engagements I can remember, because at the end of it, the director of human resources at a company of 110,000 people said, and I quote, "This has been a revelation."
I like to think of it as a couple of legs on a three-legged stool. So if you imagine a three-legged stool and you pull any leg away, the whole thing falls over and collapses. Well, processes need data to operate. And guess what? Data is absolutely useless without processes that utilize that data. And all too often, people will just have a process view or a technology view or a data view. What we're doing is we're trying to bring together, kind of, if you like, the synergy of those different, those different techniques, those different disciplines, and say, well, guys, this stuff all meshes together. You have to have, all of these components to provide a successful, and get this, it's a business solution, which may have some technology involved in it, but it absolutely will have data and it will have process. Because if you imagine a conference board with names and session IDs on it, that's not an IT system. Yeah, that's a pegboard system, but that's got a process and it's got data, and that's really important to make sure that those things are harmonized.
And a technology, which I guess is the third leg. If I'll just quickly add on to that, the people are always surprised to learn that when I do a process assignment, and just for clarity, most of my work the last 20 years has actually been in the business process change field, but I never start an assignment without doing a data model, even before we do any process modeling, even before process identification, because processes act on things. Acquire a customer, fill an order, resolve a problem. In all those cases, customer, order, problem, those are things. They will eventually be entities in a data model. We'd better have clarity on what those things are, on the concept of those things. Absolutely. Before we start worrying about processes. And it's always been in some cases, the clients specifically tell me that thing we do, which we know as data modeling, but we didn't tell them what it was, they'll say that was the most valuable part of the engagement.
Okay, well,
I think I'll
you'll step that way, okay. Well, fundamentally, information is the lifeblood of your organization. Is it important that you need to understand that? If you want to do things better, faster, more efficiently, and stop your executives from going to jail, you need to understand your information. Data modeling gives you the vehicle for doing that.
Yeah. I couldn't put it any better.
That was 2 floors. Yeah, I'll give you the 193 floor elevator pitch.
Well, by way of background, I started out primarily as a data management consultant. The first 10 years then became more of a business process consultant. So now I'm the process guy with a data background. Chris is extremely well known in the data management, information management sphere with a strong process background. And with his recently formed business consulting group, group of like-minded professionals who exploit these, I wanted to be involved in it.
Okay, so one of the key things that we're trying to do is to kind of elevate the, if you like, kind of the knowledge and the usefulness of process and data in organizations. So what we're not doing is doing detailed techie models. Rather, what we are doing is helping organizations to really kind of leverage the value that they get from data and from business process. And that means, in practical terms, that actually means discovering what processes are, identifying the key information that works within those processes, identifying the value add, and dare I say it, kind of the redundant processes. And from that, they can, if you like, they can kind of optimize the way in which a solution, whether it happens to be a technology solution or not, is built for the business. So it's really key that this is actually a business related set of activities. We actually call it process and data blueprinting.